The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air as I lay in the hospital bed, staring at the white ceiling. The cold, unforgiving sheets were wrapped around me like a constant reminder of the battle I was about to face. I was barely 18 and here I was, about to undergo a surgery that could change everything. It wasn't something I had asked for, nor something I wanted. But in this moment, it was the only choice I had left. I had to survive. The doctor had already explained the risks, the recovery time, and the long-term consequences. He said it with such calm precision that it almost felt like he wasn't talking about my life at all. His words barely registered in my mind. My thoughts kept drifting back to the one thing I couldn't control, the decision that had been made by someone else. My father. I had asked him to be here with me. After all, he was my father. But somehow, I knew that the reality of his presence in this room wasn't going to be what I expected. The door opened and there he was. My father, tall, imposing, and always dressed to impress. He stepped in with a quiet, practiced grace, looking more like a businessman than a father. His gaze met mine, and for the briefest second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. It wasn't love. It wasn't concern. It was something darker. Something I had never seen before. Ready for the surgery, sweetheart? His voice was calm, too calm. As if this was just another day in his perfectly ordered life. I nodded, but the words felt wrong. I didn't feel ready. How could I be ready when this decision wasn't mine to make? How could I be ready when the very person who should have fought for me had already signed the papers, agreeing to a surgery that would change me forever? I had always been the one who did everything right, the quiet, obedient daughter who never rocked the boat. But this was different. This was something I couldn't accept, something I couldn't ignore. But he wasn't done talking. You know, he began, his voice dipping lower as he leaned in closer to the bed, I signed the papers. I agreed to everything, but there's one condition. His eyes never left mine. What condition? I whispered, feeling my heart skip a beat. You're going to stay silent. Through all of this. If you don't, he paused, letting the words sink in, then we'll pull the plug. No surgery. No help. And you'll deal with the consequences. The weight of his words hit me like a tidal wave. Silent? The one thing I had been begging for was a simple word of encouragement, a hand to hold, but instead, he was telling me that my silence was the price for my survival. A cold chill ran down my spine. I stared up at him, searching for any sign that he was joking, but there was nothing, just a cold, calculating expression. My father, the man I had always looked up to, had just traded my voice for my life. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. You're serious? My voice trembled, but I forced the words out. He nodded slowly, a faint smirk playing at the corner of his lips. I'm serious. If you want this surgery, you'll stay silent. No complaints. No questions. You'll do what's best for the family. And if you don't? Well, you know the consequences. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout at him, to tell him everything I had bottled up inside for years. But I couldn't. I couldn't risk it. If I said the wrong thing, if I even hinted at defying him, my life, the one thing that was hanging in the balance, could slip away from me. So I did what I had always done. I stayed silent. He smiled, but it wasn't a smile of pride or love. It was something colder, something I had never seen in him before. You're a good girl, he said, straightening up. You've always been the good girl. And just like that, he left the room, leaving me alone, trapped in a hospital bed where my future, my very existence, had been reduced to a condition. Stay silent. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence in the room felt heavier than ever. I could hear my own heartbeat, thumping in my chest, but I couldn't speak. I couldn't protest. I couldn't even beg for mercy. In that moment, I realized something profound. The man who should have protected me, the man who should have been my voice, had turned my silence into a weapon. And now, my fate was tied to a simple decision that wasn't mine. The doctor entered moments later, breaking the silence that had settled over me. But I didn't hear him. All I could hear were my father's words echoing in my head, only if she stays silent. The room felt suffocating. The sterile walls, the beep of the machines, the constant hum of fluorescent lights, all of it blended into a low, constant drone that I couldn't escape. I lay in the bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing but my lips sealed. The weight of my father's words pressed heavily against me. His cold, calculating silence was now my own to bear. I had always been the quiet one, the good daughter, the one who never caused trouble, who always did as she was told. My father had raised me this way, careful, controlled, and obedient. He didn't want a daughter who questioned him. He wanted one who stayed in line. And I had done that for years. I had obeyed him, been the perfect student, the perfect child. But I had never imagined that silence would become the price of my survival. The clock on the wall ticked louder now, echoing in my head. It was as if time had slowed, leaving me in a world where I had no voice, no say in my future. All because of a simple, devastating condition: stay silent. The hospital room door opened softly, and I turned to see my mother walking in, her steps light but hesitant. She was trying to be calm, trying to hide the worry that was written all over her face. Her eyes met mine briefly, then dropped to the floor. She was afraid of what would happen if she said the wrong thing, afraid of crossing the line my father had drawn. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice soft and filled with an unnatural sweetness. I nodded, my mouth dry. I wanted to tell her how much I resented this, how much I resented everything my father had done to me. But the words wouldn't come. They couldn't come. Not now. "Are you nervous about the surgery?" she asked, sitting beside my bed. Her hands folded in her lap, her posture stiff. I wanted to say something. I wanted to yell. To scream at her for not protecting me. For letting him do this to me. But I couldn't. The silence wrapped itself around me, like a chain I couldn't break. I shook my head instead, unable to say anything. She looked at me, eyes filled with guilt, but her lips stayed closed. She knew. She knew what was happening. She knew that my father's decision had shattered something in me, but she couldn't say it. She couldn't speak the truth. "Your father thinks this is for the best," she whispered, almost to herself. We just want you to be okay, honey. You know that, right?" I wanted to respond, to tell her that she wasn't doing enough, that we weren't doing enough, but I stayed silent. I had no choice. She stood up, her face pale, and walked toward the door, pausing for a moment before leaving. "I'll be back later," she said, but I barely heard her. I was already lost in my own thoughts, in the dark pit of silence I had been forced into. Once she left, I was alone again. The room was quieter now. Too quiet. I had never felt more isolated in my life. I turned my gaze toward the window. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across the floor. It was supposed to be a peaceful evening, but I couldn't find peace. Not when everything felt like it was slipping away from me. I had tried for years to gain their approval. I had tried to be the daughter they wanted, quiet, obedient, perfect. And in doing so, I had lost myself. My own voice had become something I was scared to use. I had silenced myself for them, for their approval, for their love. But now, my silence had become the weapon they used to control me. Stay silent. The words repeated in my mind like a mantra, each repetition a reminder of what I had to endure if I wanted to survive this surgery. But something in me stirred. This wasn't the way it was supposed to be. I wasn't supposed to be a pawn in their game. I wasn't supposed to be silenced, not anymore. I had spent my entire life obeying their rules, following their orders, bending to their will. But this was different. This was my life, my future, my choice. And I wasn't going to let them take that from me. The pain from my condition was real. The surgery was necessary. But the bigger pain, the one that stung deeper than any physical ailment, was the one they had inflicted on me. The pain of being reduced to nothing but a silent, obedient daughter. I had to do something. I couldn't just let this happen. But what could I do? What options did I have when my very existence had been wrapped up in their control? My thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of the door opening. I turned to see a nurse entering the room, her face kind but impassive. "Your surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning," she said, her voice professional but gentle. "Is there anything you need before then?" I looked at her, my heart pounding. She wasn't asking about my father's conditions, about my silence. She didn't know. No one knew. But in that moment I realized something. I wasn't just a patient. I wasn't just a daughter. I was someone who had a choice, even if I had to fight for it. I wasn't going to let them win. Not like this. Not anymore. I would find a way to take back my voice. I would find a way to make them understand that I was more than the silence they tried to impose on me. Tomorrow the surgery would happen, but it wouldn't be the end of my story. It would be the beginning of something much bigger. And it all started with me breaking free of the silence. The hours leading up to the surgery felt like an eternity. I was numb, not just physically from the dull ache in my body but emotionally as well. The silence I was being forced to endure had become a thick wall around me, separating me from everything that mattered. My family, my future, my very self. But something inside me began to shift. I had to fight back. I had to reclaim my voice. As the nurse left the room, I closed my eyes, trying to push away the fear gnawing at me. I had been silent my whole life, obedient, the good daughter. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that silence hadn't saved me. It had silenced the part of me that mattered most, the part of me that deserved to be heard. Tomorrow's surgery was the only way I could get out of this pain, but I couldn't let them think they had complete control over me. They had controlled every decision, every moment, up until now. My father had made sure of that. But no more. I had to be strategic. I had to use what little leverage I had, and I knew exactly where to start. The first step? Information. I had spent years living under the same roof as my father, learning his routines, knowing his weaknesses. He was always so careful, so controlled, but everyone had a crack. His was his pride. He believed himself untouchable, above the law, above everyone else. He had always been the one who decided everything for the family, who had the final word. But I knew he was wrong. And I wasn't going to let him win without a fight. I needed to gather evidence. Something, anything, that would show how far my father was willing to go to control everything around him. And I knew exactly where to look. My father had always been secretive with his finances. He had his own files locked away in his office, files that I had never dared to open until now. I knew the layout of the house well enough to know where he kept them. His office, the one with the glass walls, had always been his domain. I had never been allowed to touch anything in there. But today I knew I would have to. I couldn't wait until the surgery was over. I couldn't wait until he thought he had won. This wasn't just about the surgery anymore. This was about taking control of my life. If I was going to survive, it would be because I made it happen. The night before my surgery, when the house was quiet and my parents were in their room, I slipped out of my bed and made my way down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was eerily still, the kind of stillness that only comes when you know something is about to change. I reached my father's office door and hesitated for a moment. I had to be careful. If I was caught, it could mean the end of any chance I had of regaining control. But there was no turning back now. I had to do this for myself. I turned the doorknob quietly, slipping inside. The room smelled of expensive leather and old paper. It was organized, meticulously so. Every document, every paper was in its place. But I wasn't looking for random papers. I was looking for something specific. I moved to his desk and carefully opened the drawer where I knew he kept his private documents. There it was, his financial records. His accounts, investments, and transactions that he had kept hidden from everyone, even from my mother. It wasn't just money he was hiding. It was control. Power. His entire life revolved around the illusion of security and perfection, and these papers were the key to breaking that illusion. I pulled out the stack of documents and began flipping through them. It didn't take long for me to find what I was looking for. Offshore accounts. Hidden assets. Funds that had been diverted to accounts that didn't exist on paper. It was all here in black and white. I took photos of everything, every account number, every transaction. I knew that once I had this evidence I could expose him for what he really was. But the most shocking part was what I found next. Among the documents was a letter, written in my father's neat handwriting, that detailed instructions for my surgery. It wasn't just a medical decision, it was a strategic move. The letter was addressed to the surgeon with clear instructions on what to do if I caused any trouble. The words made my blood run cold. She will need to be kept silent no matter what. If she resists, if she speaks up, we'll stop the surgery. She doesn't have the right to make decisions on her own. That was when it hit me. This wasn't just about controlling my health. This was about controlling every aspect of my life. The surgery wasn't for me. It was a way to keep me quiet, to keep me under his thumb. He was manipulating me into staying silent so that I would never be able to stand up for myself. I carefully put everything back in place, making sure not to leave a single trace of what I had done. I didn't know what I would do with this information yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let him win. I slipped out of the office, my heart racing, and returned to my room, trying to act as though nothing had changed. But I knew it had. Everything had changed. Tomorrow the surgery would happen, but this time, it wasn't just about my survival. It was about something bigger. I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. I wasn't going to be the obedient daughter who did whatever they told me. I was going to speak the truth, and I was going to make them pay for everything they had done to me. The day of my surgery arrived, and with it, the final test of my resolve. I could feel the tension in my body, a mixture of fear and anticipation, but more than that, I felt something stronger: determination. I wasn't going to let my father's control define me any longer. The nurse came in early, preparing me for the procedure. As she adjusted the floor and checked my vitals, I lay back in the bed, trying to calm my racing heart. But beneath the surface I was ready. Ready for the next step. I had everything I needed: the evidence, the knowledge, and the strength to take back control. My father was still a few hours away from visiting me, so I had time. I knew this was my last chance to act before the surgery began. I glanced down at the phone in my hand. There, sitting quietly in my inbox, was the email I had been preparing for days. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a letter that exposed the truth, my father's lies, his manipulations, his control. The email was addressed to the one person who could tear down the empire my father had built, the one person who would be able to stop him once and for all, Eleanor Stratton. Eleanor was someone my father had always prided himself on knowing. She was the head of a powerful nonprofit my family had worked with for years. To my father, she was more than a business associate. She was the ultimate validation. Her approval was what had kept his reputation afloat. She had been the golden gatekeeper to his world of power and prestige. But now I knew I had to use her to take him down. Dear Miss Stratton, I hope this message finds you well. My name is Jessica Carter, the daughter of Mark and Catherine Carter. I have recently come to terms with something that I can no longer keep silent about. My father has manipulated me and my family for years, but his most recent actions have gone too far. The email went on, outlining the financial fraud I had uncovered, the secret offshore accounts, the attempts to force me into silence during a necessary surgery. I attached the photos, the financial documents, and the letter from my father instructing the surgeon to keep me silent. Everything I had gathered, all the proof was ready. This was the moment when I would finally expose him for who he really was. As I hit send, I took a deep breath. It wasn't just about getting revenge anymore. It was about ensuring that my father would never have the power to control anyone else again. Just as I set the phone down, I saw him enter the room, my father. Jessica, he said in his usual calm, controlled manner. How are you feeling? I could hear the faintest hint of smugness in his voice, as if he thought everything was still under his control. As if I were still the silent daughter who would do whatever he said. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I'm fine, I said quietly, meeting his gaze. Just waiting for the surgery. His eyes flickered with a hint of impatience. You know, you've always been a trooper. I'm sure this will go smoothly. Just do your part and you'll be fine. Remember, no complaints. No speaking up. Do what's best for the family. He didn't realize it, but that last comment was his fatal mistake. He thought he could control me, dictate every aspect of my life just like he always had. But now I had something he didn't, the truth. And once that truth was out, it would be too late for him to fix things. I nodded, my expression neutral, my voice steady. I understand. The doctor entered soon after, and the preparations for the surgery began. As they wheeled me down the hallway, I felt a strange calm settle over me. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anxiety. It was the peace that comes with knowing you've made the right choice. The doors to the operating room opened, and the sterile, cold environment hit me with full force. The bright lights above me seemed harsh, unforgiving. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had taken control. I had exposed the truth. And once the surgery was over, I would finally be free. Just as they prepped me for the anesthesia, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I managed to pull it out, glancing at the screen as the nurse adjusted the phone. It was an email notification. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I will be taking immediate action. Your father's actions will not go unnoticed. It was from Eleanor Stratton. I didn't have time to read more. The world around me started to blur as the anesthesia took effect, but I knew the ball was in motion. When I woke up, the surgery would be over, and so would my father's reign of control. The world around me was blurry, a haze of white lights and muffled voices. I felt the steady rhythm of my heartbeat through the machines, a reminder that I was alive, that I had survived. But more than that, I knew the truth. I had taken control. When I opened my eyes, everything seemed surreal. The beeping machines. The soft murmur of nurses and doctors moving around me. The faint smell of antiseptic lingering in the air. But the most important thing was that I was awake and my father no longer had the power to control me. The surgery had been a success. But it was never about the surgery. The surgery was just the beginning. What mattered now was that he was no longer untouchable. The moment I had sent that email to Eleanor Stratton, everything had changed. The truth was out. There was no going back for him now. The nurse entered the room, checking the phone and adjusting the blanket over me. How are you feeling? She asked with a soft smile. Better, I said, my voice hoarse but steady. When can I go home? She looked at me with a kind smile, but I could see the hint of sympathy in her eyes. She knew. She had heard the rumors. Everyone knew what was happening now. You'll need to rest for a bit longer, she said gently. But you should be fine to leave in a few hours. I nodded, though my mind wasn't on my recovery. It was on the email I had sent. on the truth that was now in motion, and on my father who was about to lose everything he had built. Hours passed and I finally felt strong enough to sit up. As the nurse adjusted the bed, I grabbed my phone, careful not to disturb the four. My hands trembled slightly as I unlocked the screen. I had received several messages while I was unconscious, but there was one that stood out. It was from Eleanor Stratton. Jessica, I received your email. I've been in contact with the board. I've already made arrangements to sever ties with your father's business. This kind of behavior will not be tolerated, and the truth will be made public. You are not alone in this. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Eleanor had done exactly what I needed her to. She had pulled the strings that I could never have reached on my own. My father's empire was collapsing. Everything he had built, everything he had hidden, was about to be exposed. I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of vindication. The moment I had dreamed of for so long was finally here. He was finally going to be held accountable for his actions. As the hours passed, I could feel the world outside shifting. I could almost hear the tremors of my father's empire crumbling from here. There were whispers now. Whispers that would soon turn into a storm. That evening when I was finally discharged, I went home to Grandma's house. I knew that my life would never be the same, but for the first time in a long time I felt free. The following days were a whirlwind of news reports and social media posts. The article about my father's financial crimes was everywhere. His shady business deals. The offshore accounts. The manipulation. The deception. It was all out in the open. I watched as the story unfolded, my phone buzzing constantly with notifications. Clients were pulling out of his firm. His business partners were distancing themselves. Investors were pulling their money. The board at the nonprofit was meeting to discuss his involvement, and the whispers about my father were getting louder. But it wasn't just about the business. It was about the family. The people he had hurt. The people he had used. And the people who were now finally seeing him for who he really was. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't need to. He knew. He knew what was coming. And he knew it was too late to fix it. I was sitting with Grandma one evening when the phone rang. The call was from my mother. Jessica, she said, her voice shaky, your father, we need to talk. He wants to explain. He wants you to understand. I paused for a moment, considering her words. I could almost hear the desperation in her voice. She was scared. Scared of losing everything. But I wasn't interested in her apologies anymore. I don't need an explanation, I replied, my voice calm. He made his choices. And now he has to face the consequences. There was silence on the other end. She didn't know what to say. I knew she didn't understand. But she wasn't the one I was trying to reach anymore. My father had sealed his own fate the moment he tried to control me. The moment he tried to silence me. I'm done, Mom, I said, the words leaving my lips with a finality that surprised even me. I'm done with all of this. Don't call me again. I hung up, feeling the weight of everything I had gone through lift from my shoulders. The silence, the manipulation, the years of being invisible, it was all behind me now. My father's empire was falling apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The days following the fallout were a blur of emotions, but none of them were regret. The world around me had changed and so had I. My father's empire, once built on lies and manipulation, was crumbling faster than I had ever imagined. And it wasn't just his business. His reputation, which he had worked so hard to maintain, was shattered. The phone calls and emails came in waves. The media storm had caught fire, and everyone who had ever worked with my father was now distancing themselves. His clients, the ones who had trusted him for years, were pulling out, leaving him with nothing but the truth. My mother, who had once been complicit in his silence, was now a shadow of the woman she used to be. I could feel the weight of her disappointment through every word she spoke when she called, but I didn't care. She had stayed silent when it mattered most. I sat in Grandma's living room, scrolling through my phone, watching the headlines pour in. Mark Carter's firm collapses after scandalous exposures. Carter family business in crisis. Clients and partners flee. Family secrets exposed. Mark and Catherine Carter's dark past. Each headline was a reminder of what I had done, of how I had taken control of my life when no one else would. My father had tried to silence me, but instead, he had sealed his own fate. The truth was out and there was no turning back for him. It was hard to feel sorry for him, even though a part of me had once loved him unconditionally. That part of me, the obedient, quiet daughter, was gone. What was left was a woman who had learned how to stand on her own, how to find her own voice, and how to make the world listen. I had won. But it wasn't about the victory. It was about what came after. The following week, I received a letter from my father's lawyer. The letter was formal, as all legal documents were, but the words inside were far from ordinary. Dear Ms. Jessica Carter, we regret to inform you that due to recent developments, your father and mother's assets have been frozen. The investigation into their business practices is ongoing, and they are under further scrutiny by federal authorities. As such, their estate, including the house and remaining financial assets, has been placed under review. My heart skipped a beat. The confirmation of everything I had suspected. The law was catching up to them. They would lose everything. The empire that had been built on manipulation, silence, and deception would fall. And it was my doing. But as I read through the letter, I realized something. There was a part of me that didn't want to see my father suffer this way. Not because I felt guilty. No, I didn't regret what I had done, but because the justice I had achieved felt like it had come too late. I had spent so many years longing for his approval, for his love, and now it was all slipping away from both of us. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. My father and mother were forced into hiding as their business partners turned on them. The people who had once supported them were now using their names as cautionary tales. I watched as their friends distanced themselves as the truth spread like wildfire. My father's reputation was beyond repair. I never reached out to him. He never tried to contact me again either. But one day I received a message from him. It was a simple text, sent with no explanation. I'm sorry. I didn't know how to be the father you needed. I stared at the screen for a moment, feeling nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. Just a cold, quiet understanding that it didn't matter anymore. The apology came too late. He had already shown me who he truly was. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Grandma. Jessica, you're not alone. I'm proud of you. But now it's time to rebuild. I smiled to myself as I read it. Rebuild. That was exactly what I was doing. The days of silence, of being the daughter who wasn't seen, were over. I wasn't the quiet, obedient girl anymore. I was someone who had fought for herself, who had fought for her own voice. And now the future was mine to shape. I spent the next few months carefully rebuilding my life. I didn't need to be a part of their world anymore. I had a new world to build. One where I could be heard, where I could stand on my own, and where I didn't have to hide in anyone's shadow. I enrolled in a local community college, deciding to study business and law, the very fields my father had mastered and then abused. I wanted to learn everything he had kept hidden from me, not to use it against him but to empower myself. Grandma and I spent more time together, and in her, I found the unconditional love and support I had never gotten from my parents. We worked together to get my life back on track, and I found new ways to help people who were struggling with the same issues I had faced, those who felt powerless, unseen, and unheard. In the end, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about empowerment. It was about justice. And it was about taking the life I had been given and creating something that was truly mine. I had been silenced for too long. But now my voice was the loudest sound in the room.